In this video, we're going to talk about the Great Depression. And we're going to start by outlining the causes of the Great Depression. Now, you guys are doing an activity in class. I'm not going to actually do it in the video, but the song to the right is Rudy Valley's Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? Which I think really lets us understand the essence or what people really truly felt during the Great Depression. Rudy Valley's song basically literally means, Brother, can you spare a dime? Meaning, can you spare some change? And it really explains just how bad things were when one of the top songs at the time was about, can I borrow some money? Things are so bad. The next video we're not going to watch is going to be Walt Disney's Whistle While You Work, and that's also gonna, we're not gonna watch that video, but it's gonna show you a very much different feel about the Great Depression. Whistling while you work means just be happy to have a job, and a lot of people felt lucky to have a job during the Great Depression, with almost 25% of Americans that were unemployed at the time. So things are pretty bad. It's just probably one of the worst times in American history in terms of economics and people with high levels of needs. And we're going to find out how things just kept getting worse. And several events just kept accumulating over time to make things even worse. And we went from the roaring 20s and now we're in the Great Depression, which we're going to pull out of, and we're going to find out, and that's going to come out pretty much with World War II, the economics of the war. So we're not going to watch that video. All right, so let's start off with the very beginning. One of the first events that really starts the Great Depression. We have to define some key terms. First of all, we're going to talk about what's called the stock market. Now, a stock market is a system of buying and selling shares, which is kind of like a part of a company. So share prices are different because companies let people buy so much or invest so much in their company. So if they put 10 million shares of Nike out there, then the shares might only be worth $80 a piece. Where if there's only 5 shares of a company, the shares would be something like $10,000 or $15,000 a piece. So the price goes up, supply and demand. The more shares there are, the lower the price. The less shares, the higher the price. Usually, also it depends on the demand on the shares. So, for example, lots of people would like to buy pieces of Nike Corporation, and then other companies, for example, a tech firm you've never heard of, like I don't know, Footstep Techs. Nobody might want any of their shares, so their shares might be something like 30 cents a piece, where I think Nike's like $85 a share now. So people invest in the stock market. Now, during the 1920s, before the Great Depression, the stock market was doing great. It was becoming bigger and wealthier than ever. We call that a bull market. Think strong like a bull. And you can see the bull on the bottom picture with Wall Street. And Wall Street is a famous street in New York City where the NASDAQ, which is the New York Stock Exchange, is really centered around. So New York has a lot of the stocks and trading in the country. Now, they don't need to do it all in New York anymore. At the time, most of the trading was done in New York in the 1920s, but now we can do everything online, internet, because of communications and technology changed so much. Now, a bull market is when the bull stock prices rise and grow. So, bull is strong like a bull, it's charging, the market is moving forward, and actually the opposite, or the antonym for a bull market would be a bear market, believe it or not. And I had one student, he says, Mr. Metropoulos, it's kind of like a bear, hibernates. Okay. So it's kind of like the market goes to sleep. It's not that it's never going to come back, it's just it's not doing well. So for example, in 2009, we definitely had a bear market. Things went very bad very quickly. A lot of people lost a lot of money, and there was some horrible consequences from that. It was one of the causes of the Great Recession of 2009. And we're going to find out that this is very similar to how the Great Depression starts. Okay, so let's define a little bit more. In 1929, this is how bad things were. In 1929, about 3 million Americans, or 10% of Americans, owned stock. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but it really is. 1 out of 10 people in this country owned a piece of the stock market. And I think a lot of ideas can be expressed just in that picture at the bottom left hand of the screen. The guy is selling his car. It says on there, it says $10 will buy this, or $100 will buy this car. He lost my money in the stock market. It's a pretty nice car. It looks relatively new at the time, and this guy is basically giving his car away. The cars did not cost $100. They would have been $400 or $500 for a nice car. He's basically selling it for a fifth of the price to get his money back, so this guy can make it. People started, now this is what really caused a lot of the problems. People start buying stocks on what's called a margin. And we still have margin to some degree. A margin is when a buyer borrows stock money by putting a small amount of money down for a purchase. So it sounds like a really good idea, and it probably would work if just a couple people are doing this. So let's say 5% of Americans that are buying stock are borrowing some money. So with a margin, you could borrow, and this people borrowed up to 95%, meaning they wanted to spend $10,000 in the stock market. They only had to put $500 down, and then another company or a bank would lend them $9,500. And that might work if a couple of people are doing that, but could you see any possible consequences if this goes awry? What if everybody is doing this? What if everybody is borrowing all this stock? So if they're all buying this stock with money they don't have that they're borrowing, it's going to make the market go way up and look better than it really is. So the stock market might look like it's growing like crazy, but really people were buying stock with money they didn't have. So while I know you guys, we've talked about in class, you guys could see how this could cause a big problem. Believe it or not, at the time, people didn't really understand what was going on. And people are really happy just to lend the money out. Now we'll watch the video in class. We're not going to watch it, their hip hop song about the stock market. It is funny though. So what happens is everybody's borrowing all this money and they're investing in the stock market, which is good because the market's growing. The problem is all the money that's in the market's not really there. There might only be 5% of the money is actually people have. So it all comes down. So on Tuesday, October 29th in 1929, or we call it Black Tuesday, the stock market crashed. It lost $10 to $15 billion were lost by the shareholders or customers. And you can see it on the chart. If you look at the graph, it starts in 1927. You see a stock market just keeps going up and up and up. This is the Dow Jones. And it goes up. And it's going to go all the way up. It's almost at $390 million. And then it's going to come down. It's going to drop sharply. It's going to go up a little and then boom. Look at that line in the middle. It's almost like it falls out. Now, it rebounds a little, but look what happens. By 1932, the Dow Jones almost doesn't exist. There's almost no stock market in America. That's how devastating the Great Depression is going to be. Now, Black Tuesday is probably the most well-known crashes, but this is not the end of this. It's just going to keep going down and down and down and down until 1932, when it's going to come back a little, and it's going to even go down from there again, and then it's going to rebound to some degree. Not very much, though. Look at it. I mean, if you look at the graph, in 1933, the stock market is maybe what? 1/8 the size it was in 1929. So all that money's gone. And the story goes, there really were men, stockbrokers, and people are investing in the market. And these guys are going up to the top of buildings in their suits, and they're jumping off buildings and committing suicide because they don't know how to handle this. They've lost everything. You didn't just lose all your money in the stock market. If you bought on margins, that means that now you owe money that you don't have. So you lost maybe $5 million, or let's say $500,000 you invested, but then you owe another $800,000 you don't have. So the rest of your life you're going to be paying back this debt. So this causes a lot of problems in 1929. Also, we have to think about what institutions are invested in the stock market, one being the banking system. So the banks are invested in the stock market, they lose their money, and they're not going to have money. So when people go to the bank to get money, it's not going to be there. And that's going to cause a bank failure. So we're not going to have time to watch the videos. Now we're talking about some other causes. We talked about the banks failed, the stock market's going out, people are losing their money. But some things are caused by what's called overproduction of commodities. And we define commodities when we talked about economics. A commodity is something you buy, sell, or trade. And to overproduce, produce is to make, so to overmake commodities. So if you're overmaking things, so stuff's going to go wrong. During the 1920s, technology had allowed for companies to quickly and cheaply produce or make things. Okay? So as new technology comes in the 1920s, so now you can make, let's say, a bar of soap. You could make, instead of making 1 or 2 bar soap per minute with your machinery, the technology had gotten so good, you could make 500 bars of soap a minute. So if you're a businessman and you're not thinking about this clearly, you're going to try to make as much stuff as you can quickly and cheaply to get it out there, and you think people are going to pay the same prices. But what you guys understand is you understand this, the laws of supply and demand. And under this law of supply and demand, this doesn't work. Do you guys remember what is your goal if you're a business? How much should you produce is determined. You can't just produce as much as you want. You have to find what key concept, and we've talked about this. You have to find what's called, starts with an E, equilibrium. So if you understand equilibrium, you're not going to overproduce. So yes, it'd be great to make 500 bars of soap per minute and charge, 1 penny per bar, but that's not going to work. If your equilibrium is that you can only sell 100 bars per minute at 5 cents, and that's your balance. You get the maximum profits as your equilibrium. Supply and demand are perfect. That's equilibrium. Now, this led to overproduction or making of too much supply with not enough demand. You've got to have the demand there. If you don't have demand, you can't supply it. So what had happened is, and it gets even scarier, it wasn't just that they were producing things at factories that people go and buy, and it starts backing up their shelves. You can see they have too much stuff just laying around. This is actually happening in China as we speak. I've seen video where in China they're overproducing commodities and they don't know what to do with them. And a lot of the factories are just stacking this stuff up and holding on to it because they think that someday Americans are going to start buying more of these cheap products. And what might actually be happening is they're producing too much things and there's not enough people to actually buy this stuff, demand it. So they're going to have to get rid of it or stop producing and wait for the prices to go back up. Now what got really scary, and we'll talk more about, is on the left. Food started being overproduced. And they're using this new technologies like a new plow where they're just tearing up the land. And that's going to be one of the causes of the Great Dust Bowl. And we'll talk about the Dust Bowl in a later on video. Okay. Now, another cause of the Great Depression was the uneven distribution of income. So by 1929, 5% of Americans, the richest 5% of Americans, owned over 30% of the country's income. And that is a pretty scary number. Does anybody know, it was actually in the paper earlier, just recently, does anybody know what country has the highest level of unequal distribution of income in the world today? And you'd really think it'd be like a country like in Latin America or Africa where there's very few really rich people and then everybody else is hurting or poor. Actually, it's America. In America, there's estimates that the top 1% of Americans own close to 40 to 60% of what we buy, purchase, sell, and trade, of the property. So those uneven distributions, if we were going to make a prediction based on what we've learned from the Great Depression, that could have been one of the causes of the Great Recession we just had, and also could lead to further income disparities. Only 2/3 of Americans lived off $2,500 a day. And you could see in the picture below, you can see that a lot of the people start living in these like shanty towns, these little towns. I mean, this is right next to New York. You've got this is the guy's house in the middle picture in the top. I mean, the guy's literally nailing like cardboard and some wood planks together and putting some kind of stove outside to cook food, and that's his house. That's how poor people really were. But then on the right-hand picture, you can see this how wealthy they're living. Big, beautiful backyards, like the Great Gatsby, with these huge mansions with pools and water fountains and parties. Great book, Great Gatsby. You should read about that. And actually, that goes back to the 20s. But in order for somebody to live that wealthy, there's gonna have to be people that are not that don't have that